Hi, this is Adam from Stoked. My partner Parker Gates will be joining us in just a second. Today we're going to talk to you about prototyping. This is a major part of design thinking. It's something you can use to advance your projects. Think about this video as a complement to a video that we sent out a couple months ago about empathy. And if you don't remember everything that we covered perfectly in the empathy video, that's okay. This is another skill. It's going to build off of what we did, but you don't need to go back and review it right now. So we're going to do a couple things. One, I want to introduce to you the concept of prototyping and how it might be a little bit different than what you might think of when you think of the word prototyping. And then Parker is going to show us how can we actually create prototypes. When most people think about prototyping, they think about something like this. Some sort of physical device that looks close to being finished but maybe isn't quite there. There's a lot of wires and machinery, and the prototype is really meant to help the inventor figure out how best to make it function. And while I acknowledge that this is certainly a prototype, I want us to expand what we think about prototyping. Right? I want us to think about prototyping as an action. It is an iterative problem-solving method. The idea being that we make prototypes and learn from each one until we develop a final solution. Right? So it's really much more about your approach to solving a problem. I also want us to think about the idea that anything can be prototyped, not just a physical device. So I'm going to share 3 stories that get at both of these points. The first story comes from the design firm IDEO. They were working with doctors to redesign a surgical tool. And although this is an example of physical prototyping a device, I want us to focus more on how IDEO used prototyping as a problem-solving process. They began by talking with doctors about what doctors needed in terms of doing surgery, and a doctor was trying to describe how he wanted to hold the device. And so a designer ran out and grabbed a marker, a film canister, and a clip, and assembled a really crude prototype. It's what you see on the picture in front of you. And he put that in the doctor's hand and said, were you talking about something like this? And the doctor held it and said, yeah, this feels pretty interesting, and then said, well, one thing is I would actually kind of want to move the handle a little bit. I'd want to tweak this and tweak that. What this did is it changed the working session from just a conversation about what they could make to actually playing around with a very rough prototype of what they should make. And from that conversation, from that new type of conversation, they created a second prototype, a third prototype, and eventually they created the final design, which looks like this. And if you look closely, you can see some elements from the initial prototype have made their way into the final design. The second story is from a student team that was designing an app to organize and sort media content in a new way. So this is an example of digital prototyping, but what I want to convince you of or share is the fact that they didn't actually have to create a digital prototype at the beginning. In fact, what they did is they created many paper prototypes before they even coded anything. The idea is that they just drew out the interface and some different versions of what this app could look like so they could test it really quickly with users. Right, so the idea was they wanted to understand how the layout would work and what features people might find interesting. And instead of spending a week trying to program that and put it on the phone, they said, well, we can draw out a version of this app in about 5 minutes and start showing it to people. Now, they found that some of the features they thought were fantastic didn't really excite users, which is fine. They just changed the paper version of the prototype until they found features that users would like. But this was a lot faster than had they spent a week programming the app only to find out that people didn't like it. Then they would have spent another week making adjustments. Here, their iteration time was way, way faster. The last story is an example of how you can prototype an experience. This is a project that Stoked did around helping high school students better choose what colleges and universities to attend. Through doing need finding and empathy work, Stoked found that a number of recent graduates had some regrets about the school they ended up choosing. They said that they chose a school based mainly on location and on cost, instead of on other important factors like how it fit with them socially and academically. So this prototype is called the Integrity Compass. It wasn't yet decided whether or not this was an app or a product or a service. That's not important. We just wanted to understand what is the experience that students have when they are making choices about college and university, and how might that experience be different. So the prototype was really rough, and it just was basically using paper on the ground and some questionnaires. Ask students to share their preferences about how they like to study and how they best connected to peers on a social level. And by getting that information, the Integrity Compass would recommend schools based off of the students' values, right? So that represented something. That represented a different way to decide about colleges and universities than strictly on price and on location. That prototype taught us a lot about effective ways to ask students about their academic and social values. And that information helped us iterate and create better and better prototypes. So thinking about how to prototype, I want us just to focus on a couple of things. One, choose just one aspect to learn about. A lot of you have big systems of solutions, which is great. You have big problems to solve. But prototyping can work best when you choose one aspect and test it to learn more about that aspect. And as you learn more about one aspect, you can then start to test another aspect. But don't try to test them all at once. And the second one is just build a quick version that you can share with somebody. Most prototypes can be built in less than 10 minutes. And the idea is that you create something that's just good enough to share with somebody so that you can learn and build another prototype. In summary, prototyping is really more about getting it right the 10th time, not the first time. And accepting that with each iteration, you're going to learn a little bit more about your solution, and you're going to come up with a few more questions that you want answered. That's okay. That's what each iteration is for, to answer the questions that come up, so that by the 10th time, you have a lot of confidence in your solution. Before I pass over to Parker, who's going to show you how to actually make a couple of prototypes, I want to set the context. Parker's going to be prototyping a solution to a problem that came up in the video we sent out a couple months ago. Remember, he was interviewing a teacher who had some issues around how to work with not only a student, but the family of a student. So the challenge that Parker's working on is, how might we prototype a way to connect families, students, and educators so that they're all on the same page? Right? So that's the general context. Parker's going to create some prototypes to help create solutions for that problem.
Guys, all right, so we're going to talk a little bit about prototyping. So Adam gave you some stories, and now I'm going to tell you about some prototypes that I made. So you understood my problem, that I am trying to think about ways that we can get parents, students, and teachers or educators all on the same page at the same time. So I've created 3 prototypes, and I wanted to do it really fast, so I gave myself a time constraint of 3 minutes. So a couple of them are kind of obvious. So the first prototype I want to show you is going to be an app. But instead of creating an app, I did a paper prototype, kind of like what you saw earlier. So the first thing I saw is like the teacher sends a message, right? And the first screenshot says, teacher says, here's your assignment. And then the student gets a little box and can check that they got it. And then the third is like notification that the parents and the teachers are all on the same page. So that's a paper prototype that I can put in somebody's hands to test. Felt really easy to do. The second one I created was more for home users, so this might be more for parents, right? So this is my iPad that I created, and it's not licensed by Apple, but first of all, we've got our home screen that users can test. We may have them press one button, and it launches them immediately into a video chat via Skype or something along those lines with their educator, and then of course their kid would be sitting right next to them. So this gives the opportunity for live face-to-face feedback versus a text feedback. The last thing I want to show you is a prototype that's a little bit more magical in nature, but I still wanted to test something that felt really far out there, really kind of high orbit. So this is called SMS telepathy. It's kind of like Twitter, but just via my thoughts. So I could be a kid at school and I could be thinking to myself, I don't want to stop and call my mom, but I could be thinking, oh mom, I got an A+ on my test today on my exam. And she gets this little great notification, says, that's great, sweetie. And so she can let me know that she's really proud of my efforts. But this requires no effort, no technology, and it's done on the fly. So those are my first 3 prototypes that I would love to test with users to find out whether or not this is valuable or resonant with them. Thanks a lot. Looking forward to seeing you guys' prototypes.